Living in Virginia, you're in the fast lane on the information superhighway. We've invested $3 billion in Virginia's broadband network to give you one of the fastest internet connection speeds in the world, so you can build relationships, bring new business to our state, and meet the future of education. It's amazing what we can do together. Visit VCTA.com to learn how broadband connects the Commonwealth.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the VCTA Broadband Association and Comcast, connecting Virginians to their government. Well, we have a guest who's been here before, Carrie Coyner. Good to see you.
Nice to see you. Thanks for having me again.
So yesterday was crossover. What does that mean?
So crossover is the last day that each body of the General Assembly has to take up their own legislation before we cross over and send our bills over to the other body. So the House finished with our business yesterday and delivered all of our bills that made it through the House to the Senate, and the Senate has sent their bills over to the House. So today begins the work of starting to go through the other body's bills.
So tell us how your bills fared.
Sure. So I had quite a bit of success so far, and so fingers crossed that same progress happens in the Senate. Really proud of Recovery High School bill. It has had a lot of success and momentum and bipartisan support, which is important. And we're very hopeful that it will be heard in the Senate. I will be in Thursday's subcommittee meeting of education to have that bill heard.
So that means you have to make a presentation and defend your promotion.
Yes, I will be before the Senate subcommittee doing the exact same thing I did before the House subcommittees earlier in session, and so it will go through the Senate process. So I look forward to speaking up about the importance of having a public recovery high school as a Region 1 school, and then hopefully that is able to spread 2 years from now to across the entire Commonwealth.
So who is that aimed to help?
So the Recovery High School model is one we don't have in the state of Virginia today. Many other states are doing it. Some are as old as having been formed in the 1970s, but it's a model whereby students who are in their early stages of recovery treatment for substance abuse disorders or disease are able to attend a high school, continue progress towards their graduation, but also receive full-time therapeutic support and recovery support. High degrees of success in other states, and so we're hopeful that this bill is for a pilot to try it for Region 1 schools, which starts in Goochland and goes all the way down to Surrey and Sussex. It's 15 school divisions, and we're hoping to really highlight the things that are working well over those 2 years together, the areas where we need to make changes, and then come back to the General Assembly to show a path forward for the entire Commonwealth to better serve our students suffering from addiction.
So how many students do you think will participate in the pilot program?
The pilot is limited to 25. Best practice shows that anytime you're starting a recovery high school, you should start small. So we are starting with a cohort of 25. Every one of the 15 school divisions is entitled to one slot. The remaining 10 will be delved up proportionally by size of your school division. We have so much smaller school divisions and larger ones. The funding includes for 5 teachers, for a program administrator, a substance abuse counselor, a school counselor, psychologist, and nurse, and as well as transportation, which is a big piece of that pie. But we know that if we want children to graduate and if we want them to long-term recover, we need them present every day, and we don't want children to have to rely on private transportation to get there.
Did this require you to submit a budget amendment?
I did, yes, it did. So I have a budget amendment. It is moving its way through the House Appropriations Committee. And so that budget amendment did have bipartisan support in the House, so there are a lot of delegates on both sides of the aisle who signed on to it to show their support for the need to move forward with a pilot.
You also have a bill dealing with veterans and their spouses.
Yes, so that bill was combined with Delegate Willett's bill, and it made its way off the House floor with us as chief co-patrons on it, and it will move forward in the Senate. So I actually attended we have a Veterans Caucus that meets on Wednesday mornings. I was there this morning, and we go over legislation that's supportive of our military and veterans in the community, and that is one of the bills that will be moving forward in the Senate.
What are some of the other initiatives that are coming out of that caucus?
Some of the other things are really looking at, one of them is the personal property tax relief, so that veterans are able to have relief on one vehicle, so that that's a benefit that's provided to them across the entire Commonwealth. Some of the other things are associated with costs of higher education, some relief for veterans on that. Others are when your spouse has to leave employment in order to follow their military spouse. Some breaks that we give them when they have to terminate employment or leave suddenly. So just some very positive things that make it easier to be a military family in the Commonwealth.
And of course, I believe Fort Lee is in your district?
It is. So Fort Lee is in my district, and I have a lot of families who choose to move back to Virginia. Oftentimes, they served at Fort Lee, and they enjoyed their time here so much that after they're finished with their service, they retire and relocate back to our community. So we're blessed with a very large military presence in the 62nd District.
And as a result of that, statewide, there is a program, I believe, called Virginia Values Veterans.
Yes, there is. And we get presentations every week from all the different veteran agencies that provide support. This morning, we had a presentation about the land trust that preserves our military and our historic resources associated with wars in Virginia. So they came in and presented the importance of preserving things from the Revolutionary War and the Civil War and all the different sites and locations and things that are throughout the Commonwealth. So they brought in from across the entire United States, but also particular to Virginia, the importance of supporting and purchasing land that they do not want developed so that we preserve history.
I understand that Virginia recently became one of very few states that has done away with homelessness for veterans.
Yes, so the state of Virginia has done a great job of ensuring that veterans are housed. They did a great job of making that a private and public partnership to make that happen. So that's an effort that has been underway for a few years, and they've seen high degrees of success. We still have a lot of work to do in the area of mental health supports for our military. We have a discussion every single week in the Military and Veterans Caucus about the importance of suicide prevention. Our veterans are still plagued with one of the highest rates of individuals who commit suicide, and we have a real need to support families and ensure that they know where there are resources available to them so that when their loved one is in need of supports, that there are lots of options available to them.
There's been some talk over the past few years about a veterans court to help deal with those kinds of specific problems that our veterans suffer from as they come from theaters of war.
So I'm not familiar with that initiative. We did have presentations and heard from many different treatment options that they want to continue expanding. One that's been very successful is therapeutic art. We only have very few locations. I believe it's 2. It might be 3 locations in the state of Virginia. But healing art therapy has been very successful. They showed the success rates for individuals who experienced trauma, who suffered from brain injury or other injuries and had a really difficult time handling emotions and getting back into a family setting. And the healing arts therapies have been extremely successful. So that's a program that I'm very interested in looking at in the future, how we expand it to other military bases throughout the Commonwealth, because right now it's very limited offerings. So that's something that's shown high success rate.
What about career education? Is there a way for a veteran to obtain credits through our community colleges for experience they've had abroad?
So they're doing a lot in higher ed. So I think what you'll see, hopefully in the coming weeks, we'll see what bills come out of the Senate and House on each side having to do with higher education, more opportunities for veterans. So hopefully you'll have me back and I'll have an update for you on those bills.
What about your legislation dealing with developmentally disabled waivers?
Yes, so that received unanimous support in the House, and so that bill involves individuals who are currently on waivers. So as a state, we have a very long waiting list for individuals with developmental disabilities who are in need of support services in order to live more independently. We have another program called Medicaid Works. That program allows you to earn higher income than our other waivers. They're income limited. Medicaid works, you can earn more money, but you have to go through the risk of giving up a waiver you already have, which there's a long waiting list. And if you move over, you don't get your spot back, you go at the end of the line. And so what my bill provides is if you choose to leave the developmental disability waiver program and move over to Medicaid works, you have 180 days where your slot is held for you, where you can see what it's like with a different set of services, working in a different program of support. And if you figure out in 180 days that isn't working for you, you can immediately have the security of going back to your slot. Also, if your circumstances change and you have to move back to the previous waiver, you're prioritized so you don't end up at the end of that list. Right now, I hope that it takes away some of the risks for individuals who'd like higher employment and encourages them to move over to Medicaid works, which should free up some of our waitlist slots. So it had very positive response. It's no cost to the Commonwealth and will help individuals who we should be taking care of more than anybody, those who are most vulnerable in our communities.
In higher education, I believe you have an initiative there as well.
I did. I brought forth 2 bills. One did not make it out this year, but I will be bringing it back next year. It's in regards to 529 plans and making them more accessible. The second was a bill that involved more transparency of our colleges and universities. It did not survive as a bill, but it made its way into budget language, which is great. It will serve its purpose because it's a one-time item. So what that bill says is that our colleges and universities, if they are more transparent in their programs and academic areas, that every college and university should disclose how much it costs to attain certain degrees or certain program areas. When you do that, we can start to see 2 things. One, as a consumer, I can see what they're spending on the degree that I want from one university versus another, so it helps me better understand what is the university investing in my future. The second, colleges and universities aren't great about letting go of programs they've had for a long time, and it will start to show us where they're overspending in some areas that as a state, we don't have jobs that are in those areas anymore. So as a state, I think it better helps us direct and say, all right, if you want more funding, you need to do some of your own work of shifting where you're spending your dollars in programs. So it should be a cost savings to our state. It should also help consumers decide what is that university investing in. And in other states that have done it, it makes it more competitive, right? Because if we're able to compare apples to apples, you start to look at one another and say, well, how are you doing the same thing for less cost? So that made its way into budget language that Chev would look at a plan of how to survey. They don't have a tool today in their toolbox to get that data. So what the budget language said is it directed them to figure out how would you collect this information from the colleges and universities.
Now, the other bill dealing with 529 programs, that's a college saving program?
It is. So that bill that I hope next year has success would allow employers to contribute to their employees' 529 plans and receive a tax credit for doing so. It would be a toolbox for employers of a benefit. It's just like your 401k or other benefits they offer today. Right now, our state 529 plans, you may only receive a tax credit if you own the plan. And so this would say employers could contribute and receive a tax credit for contributing. The reason I think this is so important, research shows that if you actually open and have a 529 plan, you are very likely to start saving, even if it's small amounts. If you don't have a plan, you're not likely to save for college. Even though you may have the ability to put money in a savings account, you're not as likely to do it. And you save more if you have a specific college plan than a traditional savings account. So this should incentivize employers to help encourage their employees to start plans and allow them to match, to do matches, or to contribute as a benefit. So I hope to bring it back next year with more success.
Now, the bills that have passed the House successfully, are there any senators who are sponsoring similar legislation?
Not of my bills. So my bills are kind of unique. I have a philosophy of really focusing on where I've seen that most vulnerable people in our community need help. So most of my bills are centered around where I've seen gaps and needs for people, individuals with disabilities, our military families, our families trying to save for college. So as a freshman delegate, I also learned a lot of lessons about how you get Senate support and do things in the off season ahead of time. So I look forward to building more partnerships for session next year as well for more bills that will help people.
Now, I believe the governor has placed a high emphasis on early childhood education. You were on a local school board before you came here. What's your opinion on early childhood education?
It's critical. It's really important. But I have views of words of caution and words of wisdom. I think when we look at how important it is, every child having the opportunity to have play and interact with other children and those social, emotional, developmental skills is critical. And I believe we've done a great job in some of our communities of figuring out how to have public-private partnerships so that every child has an opportunity. I think my words of caution would be, I think we have gone too far in the direction of a formal academic setting for our kindergartners, and I fear for our 3 and 4-year-olds that we will try to start making them read just like we've really pushed kindergartners to have to learn to read. I believe there's so many benefits in social emotional development and learning through play, and we've lost a lot of the time and ability in those formative years where our children are figuring out how to handle emotions, how to work well with others, the basics that allow them to be great students and great teenagers and then great adults. So my words of caution as we move in this direction of the state having more formative guidance over our early childhood education is that we remain focused on the social emotional benefits and that there's nothing wrong with children playing, and we should be encouraging more of it.
I think you also have words of wisdom dealing with our standards of learning as well.
I have some thoughts on our standards of learning. That is a bill that did not survive this year in reducing our SOL testing. I hope to continue pushing when session is over for our state to look at reducing the amount of testing that we have in our schools and focusing much more on continuous growth for our students instead of high stakes once a year end year tests. So I'm going to continue advocating. We have a lot of room to improve for our young people so that they have the best possible outcomes so that they're successful in college and career and military service, wherever their journey takes them.
I think the Secretary of Education is on the same page with you. He was in here and he talked about less emphasis on SOLs, more emphasis on things like critical thinking, communication, yes, those kinds of things as well.
Yes, we just have some work to do. You know, I think one of the difficulties with being a legislature made up of such diverse, different backgrounds of people, which is also a benefit, right? But when you have an issue so big as really changing the way we've done education as a state, it's really hard for people who don't have detailed knowledge in that subject area to trust moving forward in a different direction, especially with something as important as our young people. So I completely understand the hesitancy from many of my colleagues and others in eliminating one method that we've been using, and there was a good reason for it, right? Accountability is important. We know our history, and if we don't have accountability, certain students in our community have suffered in the past because of not being held accountable that every child is accounted for. But I think we're experiencing some of that exact same problems today. Not every child is being accounted for in these high stakes once a year tests. So hopefully with more knowledge and more information sharing, we bridge that knowledge gap for everyone in state government where we can all move together arm in arm and say this is what's best for our children, and we move forward. So I know the Secretary is very passionate about moving towards growth, as is our Board of Education. They've done a really great job of rethinking what education should look like.
What about our school counselors? Do we need to improve the ratio between the counselors and the students?
We do. It's also one of those things that I see both sides of the coin on. We definitely need more school counselors. I'm very much in favor of that. But I also know that number one, we don't have probably as many school counselors today lined up ready to step in as we need. So I also look at it from a pipeline perspective. What can we take off the plates of school counselors that other professionals can and could do? There's a lot of paraprofessional work that they're doing themselves because our SOQs don't allow us to spend money and get state dollars for a lot of support positions.
Now those are the standards of quality.
Standards of quality. Sorry for
That's all right.
alphabet soup. There are only certain positions that the state gives you funding towards. So I really would encourage conversations going into next year about, there should be funds that are put in place so that tasks that counselors are doing today that others could be assisting with, that we give them the flexibility to spend money on that so we can let counselors 100% focus on what they're skilled and trained to do. So I think there's the ability to do that as well.
Does the State Board of Education set the criteria for what our standards of learning and standards of quality are?
So the General Assembly has a big part in that. So we really are the ones that have to take the leap and make some big decisions about SOQs and SOLs. Board of Education does a great job of, through the state superintendent, and the secretary does a great job of speaking up about what they believe they need for funding. There is a bill this year that is a standard of quality that I know the Board of Education is supportive of resetting some of those positions, especially our hardest to fill areas, our communities that are most in need of additional support. So that's a bill that I supported, and hopefully we continue to see traction on paying our teachers well and making sure we have enough support staff in all of our buildings.
Are we encouraging more charter schools in the Commonwealth?
I don't think we're doing more to encourage it. I think we have a history as a state of our public school divisions being able to start alternative schools if they so choose. And I think we're right where we've been historically, and we haven't seen a whole lot of those pop up. I think as a community, we have really great public schools across our state. We have communities that are in need of more supports, whether that's in school or housing and neighborhoods. And I think those are areas we can continue to see growth in as well.
You mentioned teacher compensation. There's certainly some legislation dealing with that as well.
Yes. So I was a co-patron on a bill to increase teacher pay to at or above the national average by 2025. That did not move forward this year as well. But we really need to take a look at how we're compensating our teachers. That's another area that it's a pipeline problem, right? If we're not paying teachers well, if it's not a job that we honor as a society, and I think that's one of the things that I've seen is the lack of honoring of such a position and a job in our community that we're not encouraging young people to look at as an option for their future. So getting back to it being paid well and also emphasizing the importance of it.
Now, I imagine that national average may be exceeded, for example, in Northern Virginia, but maybe far below in Southern and Southwest Virginia for teachers.
As a state, we're still way behind. We're still behind that average. And so looking at what that looks like regionally is also important. I think as you look at the diversity of our state and our economies and our businesses and our communities, we do have to start looking at regional approaches to how we tackle many different things, whether it's employment or minimum wage or all these different topics that people are bringing up. Everything has different impacts depending on the region of our state that you're in. We have a very diverse state, and when you look at the different types of bills that have been brought up, depending on the region they're from, everyone has advocacy based on the issues that they see that are hitting their communities hardest.
And you mentioned minimum wage. As I understand it, the House bill is different from the Senate bill because the Senate bill does recognize those regional concerns.
That is what I understand. I haven't seen the Senate bill yet. I look forward to seeing that. But I did hear this morning when I woke up, they were in session until I think after 1 a.m. over in the Senate, that their final amendments ended up different than the House. So those are some of the things that I will look at and see the differences of. We also had some bills relative to different communities and taxing authority. So that's another big issue that you look at regionally. Our cities and counties, there was a bill that was brought forward on the House. It made its way out that would give them equitable taxing authority. That's always been a discussion And that's a regional issue as well, depending on if you're a more urbanized area, if you have more counties in your community. And your cities would tell you, well, if you're going to get the benefits, well, then I'd like you to also have the burdens that we have that counties don't have. So those are always really difficult things because every community is unique and has different things that they are hoping that you advocate for.
And another difficult issue that the teachers raised was their ability to collectively bargain.
Yes, that was an issue as well that came up, which ended up, they did not make it out of the House version. They were taken out and excluded from that. So that was one of the issues that did not make it through the House this year.
Redistricting. You weren't here last year, but you will have to vote if it ever gets out on the concept of least for a constitutional amendment that will allow the voters to determine whether they want a bipartisan redistricting commission. Where does that stand?
Well, yesterday on the House floor, we did have a vote on Van Valkenburg's bills, which moved in that direction of supporting the constitutional amendment. I'm very supportive of it being out of those of us who are in our seats being the ones that are making that decision. So I'm very supportive of bipartisan redistricting and moving forward with that constitutional amendment and letting our voters say, and the citizens, because ultimately that's who should be making that decision, that it's no longer something that we're doing, that we put that out for a referendum for every citizen to have a vote.
So how large a commission would that constitutional amendment create, if you recall?
I don't recall off the top of my head.
And I believe it would go ultimately if that commission can't make a determination to the Virginia Supreme Court.
It would, but hopefully we have a good group of folks who are willing to, the whole purpose of it being bipartisan and
right.
being folks, their goal is to work together. And I think what we have found is when we give other issues to folks who aren't elected officials and they are there in a bipartisan effort, most of the time they figure out a way that not everybody's happy, not everybody's upset, but it's something that's in the best interest of the vast majority of citizens, and they produce a great work product. So hopefully that's the same direction that we move in with this as well.
About a minute and a half left. There are a couple of tax proposals. One increasing the gas tax, the other relating to cigarettes.
Yes, so I am not supportive of increasing the tax burden in our community. We are at a really difficult time where we're getting ready to increase a whole lot of costs. I'm very cautious when you look at the quick increase in minimum wage, when you look at some of the business costs that are going to be added for some of the things, legislation that's coming forward. I'm very cautious in looking at the impacts we're going to have on citizens in our community. That's probably one of my biggest fears coming out of this session. What was most important to my community was great places to work. Keeping crime and safety utmost importance in education. And I'm worried on two of those fronts as we're heading out of this session. So just being mindful that we need to remember that all of our employees in our community, that they want great jobs and they want to be well taken care of, but we're mindful of the costs associated with living in the Commonwealth.
Well, good luck, Delegate Carrie Coyner. Thanks for being with us again.
Thanks you for having me.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the VCTA Broadband Association and Comcast. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans. Mm-hmm.